All of our participants. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dan Allwine. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Policy at the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, or SPC. SPC is the cooperative forum for regional collaboration and planning, and we serve as the official metropolitan planning organization and economic development district for the 10-county Southwestern PA region. Our Water Resource Center promotes collaboration on water topics, is a leader in facilitating coordination and education, and we provide technical assistance to our member governments. Really excited for today's presentation on increasing stormwater resiliency through innovative codes and ordinances, and how the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, in partnership with the City of Pittsburgh, has updated its stormwater codes and ordinances. Before I introduce our speakers, just a few housekeeping items. First, today's webinar is being recorded. You'll receive a link to the webinar in your email, and feel free to pass those along to anyone that may be of interest. Another reminder is that all of our workshops are available on our website that I just put in the chat box if you want to look at past webinars and the materials from those events. Moving on to questions. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and our presenters might address them during the presentation or at the end during the question and answer session. They will answer them. During that session, the question and answer session, you can click on the raise hand button and we'll unmute you. And then if you want to ask any question, you may. All right, so let's get started. Got a great lineup here of presenters. First, Kevin Flynn. Kevin is a water resource engineer and senior vice president at the consulting firm AKRF. He supported the development of new codes, policies, and technical guidance for stormwater infrastructure for communities throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Marty Battistone. Marty is the principal environmental planner for the city of Pittsburgh. Marty has been with the city for 4 years, has seen 2 changes to the city stormwater code, and she's an alumnus here at SPC, previously working at our Water Resource Center. Thank you, Marty, for joining us. And finally, James Stitt. James is the sustainability manager for Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. James has been with the PWSA for 11 years, and a large portion of his work has been devoted to stormwater issues, everything from project development and policy enactment. All right, James, why don't you take it away? And thanks again, everyone, for joining us.
Sure thing. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate the introduction there and the opportunity with SPC to tell everybody about the work we've been doing here with the city of Pittsburgh and our consultants, AKRF, as well as a host of other agencies and departments across the region to get this thing done. We're going to talk to you today about how we approached our revisions to the stormwater codes and ordinances in the city of Pittsburgh. It's been an evolving process over the last few years. As Dan mentioned, in Marty's introduction, she's already seen 2 changes within just 4 years. And some of that was due to the Act 167 adoption, and this builds upon that. Once we did that ordinance update, we felt that there was more we could do with stormwater, that in order to get our hands around stormwater management, we needed to really approach this in a different way. So if you can go to the next slide there, Kevin, we'll get into this. We've done the introduction, so we can skip that. We'll look at what we're dealing with here in Pittsburgh, the project itself of updating our codes, some of the new regulations and what we changed and why they were done such, and then some of the resources that we created for this change, such as our design manual, and then some main takeaways that we have. When we talk about the changes that we have to make here in the city of Pittsburgh, You know, there's a lot of sort of project work going on, but that project work is often, you know, done on private property by private, you know, individual developers and private landowners. So we needed a way to, you know, bring them into the fold of stormwater management with a, you know, with a little bit more activity on those sites. So we started looking at what we could, you know, change in the codes, because ultimately stormwater management is a land use issue. And the only way we're going to get our handle on it in this region is to start to look at our land use guidance and our land use ordinance as a way to drive that increased level of stormwater management. We've got significant issues in Pittsburgh and across the region, as you are all aware. Next slide, please, Kevin. You know, everything from aging infrastructure, you know, significant combined sewer overflows with consent decrees all around, impaired streams with TMDLs and other issues from our MS4 programs and permitting, flash flooding, basement backups, landslides, all issues that are basically symptoms of just bad stormwater management. So the better we can manage that stormwater from the get-go and getting a handle on it at the point where it falls from the sky and meets the ground is going to allow us to better address all of these symptoms in a more integrated way. Next, please. Most of the city, as much of you are aware, is combined sewer sheds. I see a lot of folks on the list of attendees who are from some of the other municipalities around our region, and some of you very similar issues to Pittsburgh with combined sewers, but a lot of others having separated systems. The pink areas here are our combined sewers neighborhoods and areas and sewer sheds. The unshaded areas are not, and that's where the MS4 separated sewer and storm systems are. So we've got about 75, a little more than that % of our system is combined. But these stormwater rules and regs apply to the entire city of Pittsburgh in the hopes of, you know, eliminating that water from getting into any of these systems so that it's better managed on site. Next, Kevin. And why is this stormwater increasing problem? Well, this graph here really kind of brings that home. If you look at the number of events during any given decade over the last 60 years, you can see here that what's classified as a severe storm event has the number of those events each decade has increased exponentially. We're at almost like a 10-fold increase over the 1950s comparatively. And these are events that are, you know, heavy downburst, large amounts of rainfall, heavy wind, lightning, you know, hail, tornado force winds, etc. These are the big cloudburst storm events that we see, and they're becoming much more frequent, and they're also a type of storm that our system was never designed to handle. It can handle large amounts of rain when it falls over an extended period of time in, you know, slow, steady rainstorms, but these severe events are what cause most of our problems with those high volumes of water getting into the sewers and overcoming the capacity of our system. So we needed a better way to manage that, not just from a project standpoint, but from a policy standpoint. And so we started working with the city of Pittsburgh on, you know, what changes could be made, what can we do. We were able to get some funding from PWSA to address change in stormwater code, along with support from the Heinz Foundation that allowed us to launch this project of analyzing our code, looking for, you know, issues and problems and gaps in the code and ways to make the code itself better and easier to use and follow, as well as ways to make the code more impactful from a standpoint of managing greater volumes and improving water quality. To talk a little bit more about the project itself, I'll turn it over to Marty, who really, you know, her team over there at City Planning did kind of the lion's share of the work on the actual code revisions and pushing it through the city process. So she's got plenty of information on that, on how you might be able to apply this in a similar way to your own municipalities. Off you go, Marty. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. So we know that generally at SBC webinars, it's a mix of municipal staff and then engineers and some other folks sprinkled throughout. So we really wanted to provide some insight into the process and what we did on the city side. Next slide. So this was not a short process. We knew that going into it. And so we actually started, the kickoff was in January 2020. And obviously, even before that, we put together the RFP with PWSA, selected our consultant, AKRF, and that took a fair amount of time as well. So we officially kicked things off of January 2020. Obviously, COVID happened a little bit after that, which affected us a little bit, but because this is such a technical project, it was a little easier, I think, to transition to a completely virtual setting. And we kicked it off. We gathered all the necessary agencies and city staff, PWSA staff, and really kind of fleshed out, the known problems, what were our goals of the project. AKRF went into a super deep dive of analysis and synthesis of providing some really technical recommendations and ultimately going through all that to provide code revisions. And after we had that, we really both kind of started on the getting all those legislated and adopted and fleshing out a lot of the resources that we were looking to provide along with the code update. And we had an EPA mandated deadline of March 2022, and so that is when this went into effect, and we've been rolling it out since then. Next slide. So the project objectives were to update the city stormwater management code. As James said, we had done a update for Act 167, but we again had an EPA deadline at that time. And so we knew that even with that update, there was a lot more that we wanted to do. And one of the biggest things was just to consolidate all of the stormwater content throughout the code. It was sort of scattered in a lot of different places. Additionally, there were some conflicts or overlapping content that we really wanted to streamline. And then we wanted to ensure that the code actually helped us achieve a lot of our compliance and goals between the city and PWSA. We wanted to not just have this be a stick-based project, but also provide some carrots. So we made sure that we were providing a lot of new resources, some of those being the design manual, an online stormwater map, and really ultimately just creating a more predictable and clear system for those going through the stormwater management plan process. We wanted to make sure that it was something that could be maybe a little more enjoyable for everyone involved. And on the other side of it too, to really flesh out an inspection and enforcement program that hadn't existed previously. Next slide. So this, I won't read all these, but essentially these were the ways we went about achieving those project objectives. There was a lot of technical analysis, AKRF. I just can't say enough of how much they did, and really kept it just moving along. And yeah, there's just a ton of work that went into this. So the thing that I think I'm most proud of in this process was the engagement that we did around this. There was an agency working group which had representation from the city, from our law office, permits, licenses, and inspections, zoning, planning, Department of Public Works, and Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, all of whom intersect with stormwater issues in some way. There was PWSA staff, Allegheny County Conservation District representation, Allegheny County Health Department. So we, met with that group multiple times, a lot of ongoing engagement throughout, really trying to clarify roles between these different agencies and streamline all of the processes. We know that when people are coming to apply for a stormwater management plan and attach zoning approvals, we know that they're also navigating ENS approval at ACCD and a lot of other things. So how can we best ensure that the kind of sequencing of all those things is efficient. Additionally, we put together a stakeholder group with engineers, developers, architects, community development organizations, watershed groups, a lot of the larger landowning institutions such as the colleges and schools, people who, kind of organizations who we know can think about stormwater management on a little bit more of like a district-wide scale. We had 3 stakeholder meetings with over 125 attendees. And then we also had a focus group on affordable housing and thinking about how those types of applications navigate the stormwater management plan review process. So in addition to engagement, I think it's important that all of you at your various municipalities really think about the timing of the legislative process as well. We had to, sort of a technicality, but because we were pulling out a portion of the zoning code, we had to provide notification to everyone impacted by that, which ended up being over 30,000 residents who were technically in a stormwater management overlay. So we had to send mailers out to them twice, once for the Planning Commission and once for City Council. So that was a little bit of a feat, but we knew ahead of time that that was a public notice requirement. So when you all are undergoing, updating your code, really being able to plan out ahead of time anything like that. So we had to go to both Planning Commission and City Council, and each time there was, public notification requirements. We would do a briefing and then a formal presentation, and those bodies would vote on recommendation or adoption. So it was, quite a long time going through all that. But we also, again, had the MS4 deadline. So when we went to City Council, we knew that there were still a lot of questions that needed to be sort of fleshed out. And so we had the zoning code took effect before the MS4 deadline, even though, there was still a lot to be worked out in between that time. And this is a screenshot from, we had a question and answer page that was hosted on the Engage PGH site. So we allowed people to ask questions. I think there was a little bit of confusion about why this was affecting them, because it really didn't affect, sort of the average resident. But we made sure that we had a way to try and provide some clarity to them. Sorry, and I'll pick it up, Kevin. I know I'm going a little slow. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Kevin, who really is the brains and everything behind our new code, and he'll really highlight some of the departures from our previous code.
Thank you, Marty. As Marty mentioned, I'm just going to get into some of the details and really the highlights of what the city and PWSA were able to accomplish through this project. So Marty mentioned the extensive stakeholder engagement process that was undertaken for this project. So at the start of the project, we really wanted to get everything out on the table, throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. So we ended up analyzing at least a few dozen different potential policies and regulatory changes, as well as different technical guidance alternatives as well. So to try to organize that, all that feedback, stakeholder feedback, we tried to categorize the different policy ideas and code revision needs really into 4 categories shown here. So process improvements, technical changes, alternative compliance, trading, equity incentives, as well as inspection and enforcement. So with all of these different policy alternatives that were evaluated, we undertook an evaluation process. And that evaluation process, it was slightly different for certain policies. I mean, some things are more straightforward, where maybe definitions within different sections of the code needed to be aligned. That was more straightforward. But with some of the more larger changes and different policies that were evaluated, we undertook a process of evaluating what other cities and communities are doing. So looking at looking at different peer city precedents for different policies and codes, technical analyses for different changes on what the benefits could be to the PWSA collection system or community flooding, and then looking at cost analysis as well, and costs both to the development community that they might incur as a result of new policies, as well as what the cost would be to the city and PWSA and potential resources needs that would come with any new policy. For example, one of the policies that we looked at that wasn't carried through was, should we change the triggers, the regulatory triggers in terms of size of projects that would trigger the stormwater management regulations in the city. So that's a policy that wasn't carried through, but that of course needed to be analyzed. Is it cost feasible for smaller developments to do this? What would the resources at the city be needed to implement such a program? And what would the benefit be in terms of stormwater management and flood reduction? So similar analyses were conducted for really all the different policies that we looked at as part of the project. And here's a list of really where we ended up at the end, what we were able to accomplish in terms of new regulations and policies that were implemented as part of this project. And I'm not going to go through the full list. I'll be happy to answer questions at the end related to this list, but for the presentation, just going to pick out a few of these to focus on and provide a little more information. So the first is the implementation of, this is in the process improvement category, and implementing a two-step application and approval process for stormwater management site plans in the city. And the goal of implementing that an additional step, a conceptual review step, was one of the primary goals was to identify what the regulatory requirements are upfront for any given project. The previous code allowed for just one stormwater site plan submission. Typically, this is when the project was very far along in development. Applicants were sometimes submitting with construction-ready documents, and in some cases, the requirements of the project had not been completely confirmed with the city. Additionally, this allows for the city to identify opportunities for some of the incentive programs and other benefits to developers, as well as mutual benefits to the developers and the city that can be layered on to some of these development projects, and I'll touch on those in a second. Another focus of the update was really as Marty mentioned, just to align the code with the city's goals and PWSA's goals related to public health and safety and flood reduction specifically. Sorry, next slide here. So one of the new policies actually involves implementing more stringent stormwater rate control requirements in certain areas of the city that have seen significant impacts of flash flooding, as well as basement backups to residents and businesses within those areas of the city. So part of that analysis was really trying to identify where those issues are most prevalent in the city, and performing an analysis of both historic flooding issues, as well as the capacity of the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority collection system that's receiving the stormwater discharges from these development sites. So part of the new regulations was really going beyond the Act 167 requirements. You can see the Act 167 watersheds are overlaid on this map. In the orange, so these are new areas of the city in the code that are identified as public health and safety release rate watersheds, where there are more stringent requirements related to controlling the rates of discharge from larger stormwater events that cause those flash flooding issues and those basement backup issues in these communities. So we also looked forward with the with the guidelines and standards for the design of stormwater management systems in the city. And we strive to incorporate really the most recent climate science and local projections as well, related to the changing rainfall patterns that James presented on early in the presentation. There were really two aspects to that. First was looking at smaller, more frequent rainfall events. Here, the code defines a 95th percentile rainfall event. So that event is basically a size of a rainstorm that encompasses really 95% of the stormwater runoff volume that's generated in the city in any given year. We looked at that event, which is tied to regulations for stormwater volume reduction and water quality, and looked at historic trends and how the size of that event has changed over time. So the past code identified that event as a 1.5 inch rainfall event. So looking at analyzing historic rainfall data and trends, we've projected based on 67 years of data, developed a trend, how that event has changed over time, and projected that to the year 2100, which is the planning horizon and basis of the new design guidelines. That the requirement is now to control for volume and water quality for an event that's projected in the year 2100, and that's 1.66 inches of rainfall, whereas the past code was 1.5 inches. So we also looked at larger storm events as well, and the size of those events and frequency of those events. And in this case, we had some great local data to work with. The Carnegie Mellon University, along with RAND, had really studied and developed different climate projections for the city of Pittsburgh that are the basis of the current guidance and regulations. I mentioned part of all the policy evaluations that we did was looking at precedents in other cities, in other communities, on similar types of policies. While Pittsburgh was not the first to implement design guidelines and policies that respond to projected future climate conditions, Pittsburgh is the first non-coastal city in the United States to adopt such regulations. And again, all this is targeted at reducing flash flooding and health and safety issues associated with flooding and basement backup issues. And again, as part of that process of evaluating different policies, we did undertake a detailed cost analysis of the impact on the development community of these new regulations. So with increasing the guidance related to required future rainfall as design targets, along with that comes potentially the need for larger stormwater infrastructure and larger stormwater best management practices on development sites. So the question is how much larger? Does it make these sites no longer affordable, or does it affect the pro forma of the development project? So as part of that stakeholder engagement, really strive to be as transparent as possible as we were evaluating these policies. The development community can understand what's being considered and even evaluated for current projects or future projects that they may have been considering during this 2-year process as the code was being updated. And just here's a tabular summary of that analysis that I mentioned, looking at how these new policies could increase the need for stormwater storage on a development site. And we looked at, in this case, we looked at a variety of different size developments, everything from a 10,000 square foot development site, which would be the minimum threshold for triggering the city stormwater regulations, up to a development site of 5 acres or more, and looking at different characteristics of development projects as well, and trying to simulate that with different changes in impervious area on these sites. So these are the tabular results of part of that analysis. And being very transparent with all the stakeholders. Yes, we would be asking development projects to do more and create more stormwater storage to account for these larger events. The analysis showed, I mean, that can be anywhere between 30% larger and 42% larger, depending on the type of development and size of the development. And we were able to quantify that as a marginal cost, because as I mentioned, these are all projects that would already be triggering stormwater regulations. So the ask to the development project is to make those systems marginally bigger and to account for these future climate conditions. Another policy to highlight is the policy and guidance related to technical infeasibility and the use of in lieu fee, as well as basically an alternative to on-site stormwater management. So really a goal of the city and PWSA is to encourage on-site stormwater management from these development projects. But we understand there's some, either in many cases, physical constraints or geological constraints which may not allow for compliance with the stormwater regulations on any given development site. So previously, that was the previous regulations. The developer's engineer was really just to come make their case on why it's infeasible, and then for the developer to actually tell the city what they thought the cost of on-site management would be, and that would be the cost of a fee in lieu payment. So the new policy really it defines a very specific process to get to that technical infeasibility determination, where the developer's engineer needs to really walk through all the different options on site and demonstrate on why infiltration is infeasible, why water reuse might be infeasible, why the use of green infrastructure technologies might be infeasible, and to demonstrate that before being able to apply for a fee in lieu as an alternative to on-site management. And I mentioned before the previous fee in lieu, it was really based on a developer's engineer's estimate of construction cost, of really first cost to build a BMP on that specific development site. So we took a look at that as well, and those fee in lieu payments, what they really need to accomplish, that fee really needs to accomplish would be for the city to potentially create an equivalent stormwater management project somewhere else in that watershed. And the fee in lieu payments previously really didn't account for that in any sort of real way. So we took a look at resetting that fee in lieu to really match with what it would take for the city to implement an offsetting capital project and operate and maintain that project for what we've assumed a 40-year lifespan for that piece of infrastructure. And this is a bit of a breakdown of that analysis. So that as I just mentioned, the previous fee in lieu is really based on those first costs and those construction costs of the stormwater management system. But as you can see, that first cost, I mean, that's little less than half the fee in lieu cost under the current policy. So really looking at real cost to implement an offsetting project, and because the goal is to get that stormwater management in that watershed to respond to that development project. So if that can't be done on site, we need to be realistic about what it's going to take for the city or another entity to eventually offset the impacts of that development project. And Marty mentioned it as well. It was about getting better stormwater management performance on development sites, protecting public health and safety, We recognized in doing that could potentially impact these development projects. So to offset those impacts, a major focus of this project was trying to identify policies that can provide more flexibility as well as more certainty for developers as they go through the stormwater plan review process in the city. So these are some of the examples of new policies that were implemented along with the new code. Things like expedited review for what the city of PWSA has identified as preferred stormwater management technologies. Actually setting up the program framework for the city to actually be able to use some of that money that's paid into what is a stormwater trust fund that's derived from those in lieu fee payments, and be able to actually use some of that money on private development sites. Maybe the development project is in a strategic location where for PWSA or the city where there's flash flooding issues or other types of drainage issues where that stormwater management can have a big impact, not just on a development site, but within the community. So there's now enabling policy within the code that would allow the city to actually provide a grant payment to a developer or to a development project to go above and beyond the regulations. There's also opportunities for development projects to offset and create a banking and trading framework for development project and landowners that would allow them to maybe construct stormwater management on one portion of their property or even another site with common ownership that maybe is a more advantageous opportunity to construct stormwater systems and possibly at a lower cost for the developer. So here's kind of an illustration of one of the policies to a banking and trading program for the volume control requirements. So really the example here is if you're conducting those regulated activities on one part of your property or one part of an institutional campus, for example, there's an opportunity to provide stormwater management, offsetting stormwater management for another part of the property for unmanaged runoff. And there's a similar policy as well for implementing stormwater rate control systems as well within the same watershed or sewer shed. So another part of again making that development project development process more predictable and transparent was creating resources for the development community. So the key resource that was created as part of this project was a stormwater design manual for the city of Pittsburgh. But we also see it as a regional resource too, technical resource. So it's a combination of, as I mentioned, technical resources for the design, construction, and maintenance of stormwater management systems, but it also includes process guidance for developing these projects within the city of Pittsburgh. And it's implemented in the code by reference. So if there's updates to technology or best practices related to technical guidance and aspects of design of stormwater systems, there's ability to update this guidance without going through the legislative process that Marty mentioned. So I'm not going to go through the entire manual and contents of the manual. It's available to the public. It's available online. I encourage those that are interested to seek out that guidance and provide some links to it as well. But as I mentioned, it really covers all aspects of the regulatory requirements and then provides technical resources for siting of stormwater management systems, design of different types of stormwater best management practices, provides guidance during construction, post-construction, as well as guidance related to operations, long-term operations and maintenance of these systems by the ultimate owners. And these are just a few excerpts from the type of guidance that's contained. Really clear guidance on determining what regulations are applicable to a specific development project and what the resulting, not just technical requirements, but submission requirements would be for any given project. So trying to provide that clarity for applicants. I mentioned the technical feasibility. We've tried to map different guidance and potential feasibility obstacles for all different stormwater BMPs to different conditions, physical conditions that might be encountered on a development site in the city of Pittsburgh or really anywhere in the region. And then also detailed guidance, general guidance for siting and locating stormwater best management practices, and then very specific guidance as well for different types of stormwater management technologies. Guidance for construction best practices, as well as guidance tied to required inspections by the City Department of Permits, Licenses, and Inspections. And then just simple checklists to help allow applicants produce complete applications to the city, as well as try to have the applicants understand exactly what the plan review staff is looking for as they review these applications, both from an administrative perspective and as part of the technical review perspective. Really another important resource that's also publicly available, there'll be a link in this presentation, is an environmental map really focused on all the geographic data that we were able to compile related to planning and design of stormwater management systems within the city of Pittsburgh. And all the source data is available too in this online resource to the extent folks who want to download that and utilize that as well for stormwater planning and stormwater design. I'm going to give it back to Marty to hopefully tie us up here, and then we're going to open it up to the group for questions. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So that was a lot of content in a really short time, and really just want to hit home that we really explored a lot of different options. I think if you would have asked me at the beginning of the project, I would have absolutely assumed that the most logical change would be to make stormwater management plans and volume and rate controls required at a lower threshold of disturbance. I would have said, oh, obviously to manage more stormwater, we'll just require more projects to do it. And through a variety of technical analysis and engagement with our stakeholders, we realized that actually wasn't going to be as effective as we had initially thought. So if you want to go to the next slide, just kind of thinking through some of the other main takeaways from this process. Obviously, understanding your local legislative process and really making sure that your timing in terms of notification or when you need to present to certain groups, and making sure that your engagement starts well before then. We knew that there was going to be a lot of adjustment as this new plan got rolled out. So we really wanted to ensure that from the engineers to developers to all the agencies, that everyone was not only aware that it was happening, but also as on board as we would, kind of hope they would be. And we think we really did I feel that we really did a good job by making sure that, we were transparent about what does that mean in terms of cost? What does that look like in terms of certain site characteristics? And really going, the extra mile to ensure that it wasn't going to be a huge shock when this came into effect. And the biggest piece of the new code is the future climate change projections and ensuring that those are required with designing stormwater infrastructure moving forward. Really trying to ensure that the new code actually addresses local flooding and basement backups, and being able to demonstrate that there are more regulations in areas that we know have more problems. And really one of the biggest things I think is balancing the requirements of the development community, and also making sure that this code actually addresses the environmental concerns that we know are there and that are coming and going to get worse. So we wanted to ensure that there were lots of different incentives and flexibility in achieving the goals that we had. And again, providing resources. We really feel like between the design manual and just a clarified code and clarified process, that even if the requirements are viewed as being more stringent, that generally the process is a lot more predictable and easier to navigate, which is of a great deal of value. And yeah, like James said, that stormwater management is a land use issue, and it needs to be sort of integrated into all of those conversations and really thought about comprehensively at a city level or municipal level. So I don't see any, oh, someone just asked a question in the Q&A. So Sean said, given a development is technically infeasible, how to calculate the in lieu fee specifically, and does impervious surface play a role on fee? If it exists in a combined system area, is this factored in also? Kevin, do you want to take that?
Sure. It's the regulations are the same both in the combined system areas as well as the MS4 areas, and the fee in lieu is calculated based on the volume control requirement, and fee in lieu can be a partial fee in lieu as well. If there's certain areas of the development site that are infeasible, technically infeasible for stormwater management, it can be a fee in lieu payment for those areas only, and you can still implement stormwater controls elsewhere on the site.
All right, does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. I think, all right, well, while I let people think about if they have questions, I think another key takeaway from the planners who are actually doing the rollout of the code is hiring and training of staff was a really big piece as well. The city was not doing any inspection or enforcement of stormwater management BMPs. And so we've created a new stormwater permit, which helps track all that. And along with that, our permits licensing and inspection department has had to hire and train a lot of staff to help be able to do that inspection and enforcement. And it's, being familiar with plumbing code and a lot of different things. So that's definitely been one of the key pieces as well. All right, I'm not seeing any others.
I think while we're waiting, Marty, you did a really great job of sort of summing up some of those key points that we tried to address. And as Kevin noted, at the beginning of his talk, there was a lot of things that we had on the table as far as like our list of our dream list of items that we wanted to include in this, but many of those did not get included in this go round. This is certainly not the last approach at making these changes and improving the code. I think one of the big steps that we took here was that we turned our view from looking backwards at historical data for our calculations on rainfall to looking forward to the climate change projected models and future data, because we're building this stuff today, but it's going to be here in 25 or 50 years, still trying to manage the stormwater and the storm events that we're going to get in 25 or 50 years, not the stormwater that we're getting in 2003 or some other model year that was being used.
All right, we do have another question. Sean said, can you give an example of how code changes have improved runoff rates from residential properties? So I'll probably throw it to Kevin at some point, but I'll just say that obviously, since this just went into effect at the end of March, we're really just sort of seeing the beginning of applications that are even being held to this standard, yet they're still in the the planning application process. So none of them have even gone to construction yet. But Kevin, I don't know if you want to speak to some of the modeling that was done.
So I guess with residential properties, how it would improve runoff rates from residential properties. So this is focused on, the code update is primarily focused on projects that would trigger the post-construction stormwater management regulations, which in the city, it's 10,000 square feet. So it wouldn't necessarily result in any changes to, say, the development of a typical single family residential lot in the city of Pittsburgh. We were able to really focus on the guidance as well related to stormwater discharges and illicit stormwater discharges, both to the public right of way and to sanitary sewer systems. So we were able to take a close look at that code and really and bring that up to really what are the current goals of both PWSA, trying to protect their system from those illicit discharges, as well as the city, and protecting the city right away from the public health and safety issues that could result in some of these discharges to the right of way, such as flow over the sidewalks that could result in icing in the winter. So those aspects of the code were also updated to some extent as part of this update as well. Essentially allow the city other enforcement opportunities and more straightforward enforcement opportunities for those type of issues.
And I'll just add as well that those public health and safety release rates obviously bring down the more troubled areas. Obviously, those are going to hold residential properties in those areas to a higher standard in terms of what's coming off those properties. So we have another question that said, I saw a question from a community member, I think on that screenshot from the Engage page. James, is going to be you. I saw a question from a community member asking about receiving credit for rain barrels on residential property. Is there any plan to include rain barrels in the stormwater fee credit process?
Yeah, we get that question a lot at PWSA about the stormwater fee and can I get a credit for my rain barrel? The way the credit works right now, it's a volumetric calculation. So you have to control manage the first 3/4 of an inch of any given rainstorm. So, I mean, technically, yes, a rain barrel would work if you were, inclined to install enough rain barrels to manage that first 3/4 of an inch of whatever impervious area you have on your rooftop. So that would, for many area houses, that might, work out to be like, 8 or 9 rain barrels strung along the side of your house to do that. We do have some, because it is such a popular item for a lot of folks, and we have, great respect for anybody that wants to do this kind of work and get involved. We are trying to work out some sort of a one-time, credit or something that, install a rain barrel, get, some kind of a credit or a payment for your efforts there. That would be just like a one-time kind of thing. That has to go through PUC and get approved, with our next rate filing and the whole process that's involved there. So it's not an easy one for us to do, but right now that's kind of where it stands, and we know that it's something that the people out there want, and we're trying to work on the best way to fit it in.
Thanks, James. All right, someone said, has DEP been receptive to the trading offsets for non-contiguous sites, fee in lieu, et cetera, from the MS4 areas? So just again, we haven't, because it's still being rolled out, we've yet to kind of see any of this play out fully yet. I guess, Kevin, I don't know if you want to speak to maybe like anticipated hiccups, but generally, I guess I'll just speak that some of this really just resides, some of it, the kind of decision making resides with the city in terms of when they're doing, their zoning approvals and things like that, sort of what we approve for some of this. But I don't know, Kevin or James, if you want to weigh in on how DEP might differ.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously haven't had any of these come across our desk yet. But Kevin, I don't know if there's out in Philadelphia or Harrisburg, the other areas that we're working on similar trading and offsets. How receptive DEP's been to those.
Yeah, I think the answer is as both James and Marty mentioned, we haven't gone that process hasn't gone all the way through yet. So that for projects that are over an acre of earth disturbance and will trigger the post-construction stormwater management requirements for NPDES permits, that'll be a project by project discussion with the conservation district and DEP. But for the smaller projects that don't reach that threshold, where the city, they need the city approval for post-construction stormwater, those are the projects that that we mostly had in mind for this program. So we'll see. I guess it's to be determined how that'll play out for larger projects that want to pursue those policies.
And then someone said, can you provide additional detail on the grant payments noted in the incentive slides?
Do you want me to take them?
Yeah, if you
want. So Susan, the grant payment, if developers are interested in going above and beyond the volume control requirements, for example, if they want to provide additional volume within their BMP, there's a payment and there's a rate of payment per volume, per acre inch of volume, additional volume beyond the volume control requirements that the city can potentially fund. Again, it's at the city's discretion, and if they're in a location of interest for additional stormwater management, would be kind of things that the city might look at. But the opportunity, it's the developer builds that additional capacity, and there's a fixed rate per unit of volume that can be paid through Stormwater Trust Fund dollars. And it's detailed in the Stormwater Design Manual in section 2 of the Stormwater Design Manual, and there's also calculation examples as well for the different grant programs and grant payments.
Thanks, Kevin. And Afton said, would a one-time credit only be for new rain barrel setups, or would people that already have a setup be able to benefit from it as well? James?
Yeah, hopefully we can include anybody that's got a rain barrel that wants to, retroactively apply for that credit, as well as anyone installing a new one. The determining factor on that, again, is going to be what PUC will allow the water authority to do with that. It's oftentimes, once we put it out there, we put it in their hands, and they will analyze it and decide, how we can proceed from there. So that is our goal, is to, allow for those credits, similarly to the way that, if somebody has a rain garden already installed on a property that was, developed in 3 years ago, they can apply for a credit for that rain garden and the water that's being managed on that that rain garden. So why not the rain barrels as well? But we'll have to see how that fleshes out when the details get put into our next rate filing.
And I just want to go back just to the previous question about the banking and trading. I think James, you asked how that's played out in other communities. So City of Philadelphia has a similar trading program within their stormwater regulations. And in that case, or at least in Philadelphia, the DEP defers to the Philadelphia Water Department for any stormwater trades. So in that community, there's a path forward with DEP for those larger projects.
All right, I don't see any other questions or raised hands. Our email addresses are all in the slides. I believe Dan will send those out, or AKRF. I'm not sure who's the the keeper of the contacts, but the slides will definitely be sent to you. I don't know if Dan wanted to close us out, but thank you all for being here.
Yeah, no, just want to iterate what Marty said. Thanks for joining us. And if you know of anyone that would find this webinar useful, please share it with them. Thank you all for our panelists too. We appreciate your time. Have a good one.
All right, thanks all. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks,
Thanks,
Dan.
everyone.
Bye, all.